Okay, so we had a small problem with the camera. It got filled up. So
Yep.
we gotta just finish up the discussion here. We had just seen that heads, tails, heads took 10 times on average.
Yeah.
Now we're just looking at heads, tails.
Now we're gonna look at heads, tails, tails, and that's why it's telling me, oh no, is because I haven't typed tails here yet. But what are we expecting to see from heads, tails, tails?
Well, we're expecting to see, if we're looking at it like that, we're expecting to see it appears more often.
Not necessarily more often. But like on round 5, we saw heads, tails, tails was more likely to show up first on round 5 than heads, tails, heads was.
So,
And now we're looking at the round we expect it to show up on first.
All right.
And so what are we expecting here?
We're expecting it to be less than 10.
We're expecting it to be less than 10. How come?
because it appeared more
more often.
than heads, tails, heads.
At round 5.
Yeah.
It appeared more often.
And then, so it will be less than 10.
So we expect it to show up before round 10. So let's see what happens. Put in tails. And it runs. Hey, average match time 8.1. 8.07, 8.01, 8.03, 8.08, 7.95. So where does it look like our first appearance of heads, tails, tails is?
Well,
Around 8.
Around 8.
Around round 8. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
So we see these two sequences, heads, tails, tails, and heads, tails, heads. And they look very similar.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we ask the question, how often do they show up on round 3 for the first time? It's the same. How often do we show up on round 4 for the first time? It's the same.
But for round 5, it's different.
And do you remember why it was different?
Well, because the heads, tails, tails had no restriction on it, but the heads, tails, heads did.
Yeah.
It was a surprising restriction. If you're going to see it for the first time on round 5, heads, tails, heads had a restriction, but heads, tails, tails didn't.
Yeah.
So even though these sequences look very similar, heads, tails, tails, heads, there's a surprising and very hard to understand difference about them. And it causes one sequence to show up first on average. So if you were going to make a bet on which of these two sequences should show up first, you would want to bet on heads, tails, tails.
Cool.
Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
It took me a long time to figure this out last night, so I'm glad we were able to go through it. This is a fun problem and pretty surprising, right?
Yeah.
All right, good job this morning, guys.